So this is going to be the first video I'm going to do in probably um, a continuation series with thoughts on a college education and do writers need one. I'll go more into other videos about my opinions on MFA programs and necessity of going to grad school. This first video here is going to be just a bit more of a general opinion basically on writers and if you need to basically go to college to learn how to be a good writer. So to save everyone a whole lot of time, what this is basically going to end up with me saying is most likely you probably are going to want to take at least some college level courses in writing if your goal is to become a pretty prolific, a pretty well-renowned writer. I've mentioned before a person that's a bit of a dabbler. I said I always give the basketball comparison. The person that plays weekend basketball versus the NBA, it may not be as necessary. But for those that are looking to become very successful, and I think those that are looking to, make their mark, for a better, lack of a better term, basically in the fiction world, a college education is probably going to be necessary. So I want to begin by saying that no writer that has ever become well renowned for their writing has ever produced that writing without being educated. So no great writer basically has ever not been educated. And generally when I say that, what I'm referring to usually is someone that has read widely and read very high quality books. Right. As a general rule, you're never going to write better than the books that you read. So if you're the person that's reading, every great classical novel there is, your writing is going to be more reflective of that than the person that simply reads perhaps a trashy genre novel, right? It's because the person that reads the trashy genre novel, you're not learning the techniques. They're not seeing basically physically what they're writing, what your writing should look like, or have a foundation for what it would look like. Humans, I mean, just being humans, basically, we operate a lot on what we see. It's very difficult to kind of pull things out of our head without having seen a model for what we're trying to create. So if your model basically for a novel is going to be, the trashy genre novel, your work is going to reflect that. Obviously, if you love that type of genre, if you're not looking to write, the great American novel, then that's fine. You actually are better off doing that because your work will reflect that. But if you are looking to write something very grand, the highest quality writing that you've read, your work will not surpass that point. So you always have to be willing to read basically the best stuff to learn the best techniques to get that framework. And then hopefully at some point, having learned all those techniques and over time, you're able to apply those techniques and to surpass that. But again, no good writer has ever not been educated. Even the ones you might say that might be self-taught, or have no college education, they've read a lot and they have studied a lot of the genre still on their own. They never come to the page basically without any sort of education at all. So if that's going to be your argument against going to a university by citing those few examples, just know that if you are going to be like that and you want to use that model, you yourself on your own are going to have to do a lot of work in basically studying fiction. And I'm not talking just reading a lot of books. I'm talking about learning how to actually study and analyze fiction to a relatively high academic degree. And that is really what the importance of having a college education is. The argument I would make in favor of people going to a university is it teaches you how to analyze fiction. It teaches you how to read and how to break down the techniques of other authors. It teaches you how to think. And I'll give an example here. So say you are a fan of Shakespeare and you go out and you read for the first time. I'll give an example. Like, say you read Macbeth, right? the person who enjoys the novel might read it once, maybe twice, a couple times over, right? And you might learn the play. But if you haven't learned how to analyze it, you're going to miss a lot of the techniques that you could apply to your own writing. Say you're trying to be a playwright. If you aren't able to study it, you're not going to be able to apply the techniques. It's not enough to having read it. So, to give the example of Macbeth here, you might read it several times, but it may not be until you go to a university that your professor points out, well, the character of Macbeth and his wife, they're very young. The Macbeth character is a very young character. It's not expressly said at all. If you read it in Macbeth, it's never expressly said what the age is. But your professor basically would probably point out the character is very young. The reason why is when you analyze a little bit closer, you realize that the character of Macbeth and Lady Macbeth represent ambition, and specifically youthful ambition. Someone that's a lot older and more versed in the years probably wouldn't be as ambitious, probably wouldn't be as perhaps crazy to commit, the regicide and murder an entire, lineage of kings and take power. That's a very young and a very sort of young, ambitious, kind of crazy minded thing. And so you would not know that probably unless you had taken some sort of courses on Macbeth, right? This is the kind of thing I'm referring to when I'm talking about going to university. It teaches you to analyze things at a much deeper level than where you're at if you're just by yourself. So that was my first argument in favor of a university education. The idea that universities will teach you how to analyze fiction. It's one of the most important skills, just because as a writer you need to be able to recognize a symbol when it's in a work, right? You need to be able to recognize and make out theme. You need to be able to understand an author's word choice in in their word selection, why they wrote something a certain way, why they changed a certain technique. And I don't think people are very good about teaching these things by themselves. It's something that I do think that universities basically provide, that as a writer you can only really get from them. Now, my second point and my other argument in favor of a university education is that universities, English programs, and not just English, but just the general classes, they give you a general knowledge base to work off of. And when I say general knowledge, what I'm referring to is the person who maybe self-teaches themselves how to write. The ideas you express in your books may be ideas that are perhaps already discredited or commonplace. Like someone might have some very lengthy discussion on a certain topic that is already commonly known, or a theory that's already been very commonly discredited. Or you might, perhaps you have like an interpretation of something, like you might interpret maybe a myth one way, right? When it's obviously very heavily understood that the myth and the symbolism of a certain story means the exact opposite. There's a certain level, I guess the word is ignorance. Like there's a certain level basically of perhaps ignorance that you might have towards certain elements of writing in general knowledge, that having university education can help, will basically stop you from alleviating. You'll realize, oh, this theory already exists here. What I was saying is already treaded ground. So those are my two initial arguments in favor of a writer going to college, both learning how to analyze fiction and also getting just a general knowledge base. I'll have more opinions on things like critique groups, professors, access to libraries, other certain things that might be advantageous, and I'll also get into some of the negatives and the cons too of universities, and I'll go a bit more into MFA programs, my thought on those as well. But for now, I wanted just to lay out the real two foundational reasons why, if you're considering going to college, what you might the reasons why you might want to do that, or if you're looking to just learn on your own, the two things that need to be addressed. Again, I'm not sure how you would really improve your general knowledge base. I mean, with the internet nowadays, perhaps, you can find anything. So maybe you're able to, sort of leverage the internet or take online classes in some fashion. But I'm still kind of the tried and true old theory that, you need to go to college basically to learn these sorts of things. But yeah, so any, questions on these topics, any, perhaps differing opinions you want to offer, feel free to leave them in the comments. Otherwise, like I said, I will continue the series later on, and I'll add more and sort of build off of this.